Yeah, so today I'm just going to go through kind of some mistakes that all of you made in the outcome 3, the research method SAC, just so that like we can maybe brush up on these mistakes and kind of avoid them for the exam tomorrow. So with multiple choice, honestly, like you guys did pretty good. Most of the multiple choice you got correct. I'll just talk about the ones that most people got wrong. Question 5 was a difficult multiple choice for most of you. I think because, again, with the potential confounding variables, there are a lot of them. And a lot of you circled experimenter effect, but this was wrong because the experimenter effect is actually a potential confounding variable. The reason that the answer was double-blind procedure is because the double-blind procedure is related to potential confounding variables. I mean, it's like a method that we use to get rid of the experimenter effect. But the double-blind procedure is a solution. It's not the actual name of a potential confounding variable. It's the solution that we use to minimize the effect of the experimenter effect. So that's why the correct answer was B, but a lot of you wrote that it was D for some reason. Okay, so that was one mistake that some of you made. Again, don't get confused between the actual potential confounding variables and the solutions or the ways that we minimize. Okay, those are two different things. Although they work together, they're still two different concepts. Most of the others were fine. I'm trying to look at which one. Oh yeah, this one was also another one. So question 9. So some of you mentioned that, a lot of you actually, or quite, and probably more than half the class mentioned D for this question, which is wrong. Participants are less likely to drop out of the study if they are paired with another participant. Listen, I can understand why you might think that was the correct answer. I mean, like when you're paired with someone else, you kind of have this loyalty towards them to stay in the study. But in actual fact, the actual thing is that we're looking at the advantage, okay, a clear advantage of a matched participants design. And the most correct answer in this case was that participants are as alike as possible. So we're matching them on similar characteristics. And so that would decrease individual participant differences. And we said in some of the other experimental designs, like independent groups, the increased individual participant differences is actually the disadvantage of that study. And so for the matched participant design, it actually becomes the advantage. The fact that we're decreasing those individual participant differences becomes the advantage. So just be careful to properly go through each of those designs and know the differences between them. Okay, so moving further down. Question 10 was fine. What else do we have here? This scenario was also fine. Most of you were able to identify that it was convenient sampling because the participants were volunteers. Question 12 was fine as well. Question 13 was fine as well. Most of you were able to say that it was independent groups. Question 14 was fine as well. Question 15, yeah. So question 15, some of you mentioned D, dietary habits of each student, which maybe in some very far-fetched, indirect, very distant way, you can make a link between dietary habits and the DV here, maybe, but it's not the direct answer. The most direct answer that most would affect, or that would have the most effect on the DV, or the most unwanted effect, would be the individual study habits, okay? Particularly because Dr. Luthra is examining the effect of fish oil tablet consumption on academic performance, okay? More than the food you eat, I would say there's a more direct effect on the individual study habits. So how you study will have more of an unwanted effect on the DV rather than what you eat for breakfast or lunch. Okay, so that's why, even though D could potentially be correct in a very far-fetched way, C is the best answer. And sometimes in multiple choice, there are sometimes two possible answers, but it's a matter of choosing the answer that's the best answer or the most correct answer. Okay, so moving further down, let's see what else was there. Question 16. A small handful of you got question 16 wrong. Most of you said that it was a longitudinal study. Some of you selected that it was a cross-sectional study. And the main difference between the two that we need to remember is a cross-sectional study assesses a behavior at one point in time, like for example, students' attitudes towards e-learning in 2020. It's only focusing on that year, 1 year, 2020. It's a cross-section or a kind of snapshot into that particular year. A longitudinal study, remember we said it's more like a movie strip. It's more like talking about a number of years. So maybe a student's attitude towards learning from the year that they started grade prep, maybe 2004, to the year that they finished their schooling, which was probably, let's say, maybe 2017. So that is a longitudinal study because it takes a longer period of time. And because we're studying the identical twins at different time points throughout their life, throughout being the keyword there, we are suggesting that we're studying them for a long period of time rather than just one particular year of their life. Okay, so that's why the reason the answer was B rather than D. Okay, so that is basically, yeah, that was the answer for that one. So hold on, let me just get rid of the scribbles. Okay. Going further down, question 7, most of you got correct, and a lot of you actually wrote CDs on your thing, which is good, which is showing that that memory tip is helping you. So that's good. It's always good to use memory tips to remember things. Question 18, a lot of you got this right, which was really good. Question 19 as well, and question 20. Question 20, some of you got wrong, simply because you mixed up the design. So a lot of you circled order effect independent groups or experimenter effect repeated measures. So you either mixed up the name of the effect, which should have been order effect, or you mixed up the design that that effect comes up in. So obviously the correct answer is B here, because order effects only occur in repeated measures design. Okay, and one of you really wrote a nice memory tip on the side, and I'll probably mention that to everyone, so probably everyone can learn from that. And you wrote order like that, and then you wrote order effects like only occur in repeated measures design. So only occur repeated measures design. So that was a nice way. I really like that. That was a good memory tip one of you mentioned. So I don't know, that might help the rest of you as well. Okay, anyways, going down. Short answer questions. This is where I think a lot of you, some of you actually got 20 out of 20 on multiple choice or 19 out of 20. But when it came to short answers, everyone did drop at least a few marks there. Okay, so the first question was name the specific sampling procedure. Most of you did this right, but I'll write down some of the responses that some of you put in, just so that we can avoid that in the future. Some of you wrote some of you wrote convenient sampling. Let me just see the question properly, the scenario again. Okay, some of you wrote convenient, which I said is wrong because it's not the correct term. It should be convenience. Okay, that was one mistake some of you made. Some of you wrote that it was random sampling, which is not correct because no attempt was made by the experimenter, Dr. Fairley, to actually randomize the participants or to ensure an equal chance that everyone was selected. Some of you wrote voluntary sampling, probably because you saw the word volunteer in the scenario. Voluntary sample is not a thing, so it can't be an answer, okay, because it's not one of the specific sampling procedures we learned. So the only answer for that question was convenience sampling. So if you named that, you got 1 mark. And if you gave the relevant advantage of that sampling procedure, that's where your other 1 mark came from. Okay, so that would have equal to 2 marks there. Okay, how do I get rid of this now? Okay, question part B. Part B, honestly, I can say that I wasn't 100% happy with anyone's research hypothesis. I mean, like even people that scored really highly, like I was like satisfied with your hypothesis, but I wasn't overjoyed with your hypothesis, if that makes sense. Listen, I'm just being quite evil because I just have, I just always, like to see a well-written hypothesis. I did give you guys marks and I didn't expect you to fully operationalize the hypothesis. For example, if your hypothesis was not fully operationalized or you only operationalized the DV but not the IV, I didn't make you lose marks for it. I still gave you the marks. The only way you would have lost marks in this is either your hypothesis was way too short or basic, which means that it probably didn't include the actual variables that were being tested. Okay, obviously, if you're not including the IV and DV in your hypothesis, it's not really a hypothesis. Some of you mentioned the hypothesis as a neutral statement rather than a prediction. What that means is you were missing the direction of effect or the trend. So you talked about the fact that observational learning has an effect on people's ability to, make less mistakes on tennis serves or whatever, or to play tennis, but you didn't specify a trend word like increased or decreased. Like you didn't mention like that. So obviously you didn't get full marks for that, okay? Just to give you guys an idea of what I was expecting, if I'm gonna write this out myself, and I need to look at the scenario now again to do this. Yeah, so you could have written something like, it was hypothesized that tennis club members who who engaged observational learning and then operationalize that through watching, how many minutes is that video? Through watching and then the DV was specifically the mean score out of 50. So they would achieve higher accuracy in tennis serving performance as indicated by a higher mean score out of 50. And then you would just write compared to tennis club members who do not watch the video and who only receive instructions, okay, or receive a set of instructions. So that is basically like, that probably is like what I would have really, really, really liked. But again, like you guys are just in year 11. So again, I'm really being quite pushy with this. So yeah, that's probably what I would have really liked the most. Okay, but again, like, yeah, you guys are in year 11, so don't stress. We're not going to put that much expectations on you, but just to give you an idea. Again, a lot of this, guys, comes down to grammar and English, okay? A lot of your ability to answer short answer questions in English, in psychology, it is very dependent. If you don't have good grammatical expression, like, you know, how to write a sentence, separate it using commas, all that kind of stuff, or how to express yourself clearly, it is going to be hard for you to write a research hypothesis, okay? But again, that's something we can work on. Okay, a question. So what was the question? Let me just quickly read that. Is there any way we can see our individual papers so we know exactly what we got wrong? There is not an individual way. I have thought about that. Honestly, if we had done this SAC on EP, looking back, it would have been better. But we didn't know at the time that all this would have happened. So what I can do is I can email you a very brief kind of feedback to each of you, just showing or just telling you guys the topics or key skills you got wrong. Okay, that's probably the best we can do at this point. I don't really, I have a scanner, but my scanner is like very malfunctioning, so it doesn't work well. So what I'll do is I'll email you guys the individual topics that you got wrong that made you lose marks, so you can work on that. Okay, that's probably the best thing we can do. Okay, moving on. So that's again, part C, most of you did well. You wrote independent groups design. Some of you lost marks for this as well. And again, I'm not being pedantic, but maybe I am. Some of you didn't name this properly. Listen, if you write something like individual participants does not equal to independent groups. That's not the same word. It's not the same term. So I can't give you the marks for that. Some of you even wrote, let's see. Some of you even wrote independent design. You lost marks for that. You got 0 marks for that. The reason being is that it's not the exact term. Okay, I know that's being really harsh. I know that's being really pedantic, but again, next year when you get to year 12, regardless of who you have as your teacher, you are obviously going to get deducted marks for that. So better to know from the beginning. Okay, so that's again reasons why you might have lost marks there. Part D, a lot of you did well in this question. In fact, much better than what I had thought, especially considering that this topic gets students confused every year. The only reason why a lot of you lost marks is that you do need to explain, you do need to link back to how your chosen unwanted variable does affect or has the ability to affect the DV results in an unwanted way. So I'll give you an example. A lot of you mentioned like previous experience playing tennis. That was a really good variable. Playing experience with tennis, that doesn't sound right, but okay. And a lot of you mentioned that some people may have more experience playing tennis. They might have been playing it for tennis example for more years. And then you stop there. You didn't mention like how that would affect the results. You could say because of this, these players may have a higher mean score due to their own experience rather than just because they watched the video. Okay. So you have to link it back to the mean score. You have to link it back to the results, how their results might have been higher than they would have been because of the fact that they had this previous playing experience or previous proficiency in playing tennis. Okay, so just a matter of the how. You need to link back to how that variable affects the results in an unwanted way. Okay, do Dr. Fairley's results support this hypothesis? This was an excellently answered question. Almost all of you, I think all of you got this answer correct, which was really good. And all of you linked back to the data in the table, which was excellent. So no issues there. Similarly, almost all of you got full marks for this question, the qualitative and quantitative data. And a lot of you were able to give really good examples as well. So no issues there at all. Question 3, this one was also really well answered by all of you. Again, looking at independent, dependent variable. So no issues there. Question 4, this was also answered well by most of you. The only issue is, and I'll just type it up so that it's clearer to everyone. The only issue was some of you confused self-reports with another data collection method, self-reports with other research methodologies. So, for example, some of you started to say that, an advantage is that you're observing the person so that you can have a really good understanding directly of how they're behaving. But then automatically that made me think that you'd confused self-reports with observational studies. Some of you were really vague with your answers for this one. So you said, it allows a person to, it allows the experimenter to learn more about themselves. But I'm like, the experimenter doesn't learn more about themselves through the self-report. They learn more about the participants that they're dealing with. So like some of you, I think in the slide, it said that self-reports allow for personalized collection of information. Some of you actually wrote impersonalized, which is the opposite. Okay, so again, your grammar and spelling related issues are warping your answers to be something else. So you've got to be really careful with how you write your answers, okay? But yeah, other than that, it was pretty good. Some of you actually also lost marks here. Sorry, I'll just mention this. Because you mentioned one word, like you said like a disadvantage was that it is biased. And then you just wrote full stop, but you didn't go into depth as what do you mean by biased? You have to say biased meaning it can be unreliable. So you need to give a little bit more information. Another issue I was seeing with a lot of people is you were doing this advantage, dot point, one word answer, disadvantage, dot point, one word answer. This is not right. I didn't deduct marks from you for this, obviously. But just for the future, unless the question says to list or to name something, no dot points otherwise, okay? So unless it asks you to list or name, you can obviously list it out, which we see in the next few questions. But unless it says to evaluate, if it says to evaluate, explain, outline, you've got to write it in a proper sentence. That's why we give you those lines there, okay? So just getting into those habits there of answering questions. Okay, Elisa was fine as well. A lot of you said use the exact example we showed you in class of the putting the names in the hat, putting the names in the box, choosing them randomly. Some of you talked about computer generator, which was also correct. One thing that we need to mention is that some of you used the word random. So you did use the word random, but then your example was not consistent with what random means. What this means is some of you said that, oh, you would go into a supermarket and ask people at random what they would want, but then you're not actually giving everyone in that supermarket an equal chance of being selected. For example, the person who's at the cashier or at the cash register paying for their groceries, they don't have a chance to be involved in your study. So your example wasn't consistent with the word random, but you just included the word random in your answer, but it didn't make your answer correct, if that makes sense. Okay. So basically, one thing, a lot of you were not able to justify why ELISA using a random sample would be considered a fair or unbiased sample. What we were looking for is either you saying that the sample would allow an equal chance for everyone to be selected. Everyone to be selected. That was amazing. If you mentioned that, like, I was really happy with that. Even if you mentioned something along those lines, like the sample would be more balanced and wouldn't be based on who ELISA preferred or who ELISA wanted to be in the study, or based on ELISA's favoritism, that was still good. I still gave you the mark for that, okay? But if you didn't mention any of these 2 points or anything similar to this, then obviously you did lose 1 mark there, okay? Going down, so this is an example of a question where we can use the word list, okay? And in this question, it was perfectly acceptable and actually encouraged that you do write dot points because it says to list. And a lot of you did dot point this out. Some of you mentioned this, which I thought was kind of funny, a signature box or a place for the participant to sign. I'd never expected this answer, but honestly, like, it's not wrong. So I still gave you the mark for that, okay? But yeah, it's not wrong, but there were other things you could have mentioned. Again, yeah, it's not a big deal, okay? But in the future, maybe think about the other things, okay? It would be better if you talked about something like potential risks, withdrawal rights. Some of you mentioned, I think a few of you did this thing where you wrote signature box, and then you wrote a tick box that the participant agrees to participate. Now, I did not give you 2 marks if you wrote these 2 points. The reason being is that they're literally just the same thing, very similar and too similar to be considered as 2 separate points. Okay, so be careful when you write answers like that. Okay, the last question was basically looking at Dr. Ravi's study. Almost probably estimated 90% of you got this question right. You said it was placebo effect, which was really good. It was similar to the kind of example in the book as well. But yeah, again, it was good that most of you were able to identify that. A lot of you were able to also talk about the effect of this, okay? And the main keywords we were looking for with this were the fact that the placebo, or receiving that white color pill, put expectations or put beliefs in the participant, okay? And that these beliefs may have affected, their ability. It might have caused them to feel like they were better, and thus warps the results that Dr. Ravi was trying to obtain. Some of you talked about the expectations and beliefs, but you didn't link it to how the results would be confounded, okay? So again, you really need to talk about the fact that, as a result of taking this tablet, the participant is going to report feeling better. And obviously this is unwanted because, participants might report that they feel better than they actually do, that they have less migraines than they actually do because of the expectation that they've been given a tablet. So most of you, or some of you, did mention that really well. For those of you who didn't, you got 1 mark out of 2. Okay, name an ethical principle. Almost all of you said withdrawal rights, which is correct. The actual answer that I had in mind was different, but again, withdrawal rights is relevant to the scenario. The actual one that I had in mind was the no harm principle, because obviously a lot of you did know as well with withdrawal rights that a participant got to the point where their head was throbbing, to the point where the migraine was so bad that they fainted, okay? And a lot of you, I don't know if you realized, but you didn't acknowledge the fact that this was breaching the no harm principle, that the participant's safety was at risk. Okay, just another alternative answer. All of you who wrote withdrawal rights, you still got full marks for that, because upon reading the scenario again, I realized that that was a perfectly acceptable answer as well. Okay, but just again, looking at different answers that were possible. Okay, and the last question, distinguish between a population and sample. This question was supposed to be easy, but I don't know, some of you, again, grammar got in the way of you getting full marks for this. Some of you wrote a population is a big group, but like, that's not like a definition. So you needed to write something like a population is a larger group of people of research interest, okay? Or you needed, for the sample, for example, a lot of you wrote the sample is the smaller group, or the sample are the specific group of people. But then you did mention that they're the smaller subsection of the population, or that they are the actual people who take part in the experiment. Okay, so again, some of you lost marks here simply because you vaguely worded your response, or the response wasn't detailed enough. Okay, yeah, that brings us to the end of the SAC. So again, the overall SAC performance was really, really good. I did not have any issues with that. Any other questions relating to research methods? I will obviously email you some individual kind of brief feedback, but any questions about like the SAC or any of the questions we just went through? No, all good. All right, if you have any questions, put it in the chat box. I did realize that some of you wanted to go through other topics. So what I'll do is I will open those up. And for the time being, I think I'm just going to stop the recording here.